controlled, is being restricted. So there's no production of GnRH, right? But during puberty, or after puberty, ooh, after puberty, what happens is the hypothalamus is no longer controlled, right? Is no longer regulated, so it's so how GnRH triggers the production of FSH and LH from the anterior pituitary gland. FSH is responsible for sperm maturation, and LH is responsible for producing testosterone. And LH is also responsible for maintaining male reproductive system, and testosterone, of course, is responsible for secondary sexual characteristics. All right. Male reproductive system. Fetus. Let's talk about fetus. Presence of the chromosome Y, the Y chromosome, stimulates male differentiation because it produces androgen, and androgen promotes male differentiation. During childhood, what happens is that androgen production becomes low, but testosterone level becomes really high, and then it causes sperm production. Right. FSH stimulates Sertoli cells that trigger sperm maturation, and LH causes the production of testosterone, like I said earlier, blah blah blah, testosterone high, and then declines as we age, and then those hormones like testosterone and estrogen, like androgen, whatever that we're going to talk about, always have a negative feedback on the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland. You'll see why really soon. In females, what happens is, like we talked about, ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen is secreted in response to FSH. FSH triggers estrogen, and estrogen is very important for thickening of the lining of the uterus, endometrium, each month to prepare for implantation if there was to be a zygote, right? Progesterone is secreted by corpus luteum. Corpus luteum is, yeah, like it said, the follicle remains after ovulation. I'll show you from I have a picture. Yeah, this is the corpus luteum, right? And I said follicles mature and then ovulates, right? And the corpus luteum is the remain of the follicle. Corpus luteum is really important. You'll see really soon. Where was I? Here, right? Corpus luteum. Corpus luteum responds to LH, right? Progesterone is not involved in thickening of the endometrium, but it is important in maintaining what is produced by estrogen. Right? It is important to maintain the thickening of the endometrium. Right. By the end of the first trimester, progesterone is supplied by the placenta. I think you should talk about it later. Menstrual cycle. Let's talk about menstrual cycle. It has four phases, four events: follicular phase, ovulation, luteal phase, menstruation. Let's talk about follicular phase, the first step, right? In follicular phase, what happens is that hypothalamus increase the secretion of GnRH from and this hypothalamus is responding to the decrease of estrogen and progesterone, right? In this phase, there's low estrogen and progesterone, So you need high level of estrogen and progesterone for thickening of the endometrium and for maintaining it, right? So hypothalamus sense the decrease of estrogen and progesterone, so it secretes GnRH. And GnRH increases LH and FSH, like we talked about. This is from anterior pituitary gland, right? And LH and FSH work together to develop follicles. Develop follicles begin to produce estrogen with a negative feedback on GnRH, LH, and FSH. What it means is that the more estrogen and progesterone you produce, the less GnRH, LH, and FSH you have. Estrogen work to regrow endometrial lining, right? We talked about it. And second phase, ovulation, right? Second phase, ovulation. So estrogen has a negative feedback, but it also has a positive feedback, right? Weird, right? Negative feedback, positive feedback. What happens is that in this phase, estrogen has a negative feedback on GnRH, right? And FSH and LH. But eventually, in ovulation phase, estrogen reaches its threshold that paradoxically results in positive feedback of GnRH, LH, and LH and FSH, right? Because LH surge is the cause of ovulation. You need a really high concentration of LH to cause ovulation, but you also need high concentration of estrogen in this phase too, right? So the key word is paradoxically, right? Luteal phase, third phase, right? LH causes the rupture follicle to form corpus luteum. This is this phase, right? LH causes the rupture of this to form corpus luteum, right? The whole point, like the whole reason why ovulation happens is because of the LH surge, right? And that this rupture follicle ends up being a corpus luteum. And estrogen established, like we talked about it, progesterone maintaining, right? Progesterone therefore begins to rise as estrogen level remains high. That makes sense. But you see this? Now in luteal phase, there's a negative feedback on GnRH, FSH, LH again, right? The reason why you need a negative feedback in luteal phase is because you do not want another ovulation, right? Because high concentration of LH will cause another ovulation, right? It will cause LH surge and it will cause another ovulation, right? You do not want that. So the reason why you need a negative feedback in this phase is to prevent another ovulation. In menstrual phase, assuming that implantation did not occur, right? Ovulation and menstruation, obviously they're two different things right now, right? They're two different things. I first thought they were the same, but I took the class and I'm like, oh, they're different, right? Menstruation, assuming that implantation did not occur, right? No zygotes form. Corpus luteum loses its stimulation from LH. So corpus luteum is not. This corpus luteum is losing its stimulation, right? Progesterone level decline because you don't need progesterone anymore, right? You don't need to maintain the endometrium lining, right? So the uterine lining gets destroyed, basically, right? That's why you bleed when you have period. And loss of estrogen and progesterone remove the negative feedback of GnRH, so the next cycle can begin. Loss of estrogen and progesterone, right? And see now, like at the end of menstruation, you have low level of estrogen and progesterone, right? That goes back to follicular phase. Hypothalamus will increase its secretion of GnRH to respond to this. It's like a whole cycle, you know. But let's say implantation did occur, you form a zygote, right? Instead of having a menstruation, you form a zygote. Then the zygote turn into blastocytes. Just for the sake of this, let's just say the blastocyte is a mature version of zygotes. I think MCAT book should talk about it later. We should go more in depth. So blastocytes secrete HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. Oh, gonadotropin. HCG is the same as LH. What does LH do? Well, LH LH is supposed to, let's just make sure. LH is supposed to produce progesterone, right? Progesterone maintains uterine lining, right? Yeah, therefore maintain corpus luteum. You're right. That's right. HCG is very important during first trimester development because we talked about it, estrogen, progesterone maintaining. By the second trimester, HCG level declines because placenta is mature enough to make its own hormones, right? And during pregnancy, there's still negative feedback on GnRH secretion because you do not want another ovulation. Like I said, you do not want another ovulation, you don't want another pregnancy, right? So there's a negative feedback. High level of estrogen, progesterone has a negative feedback on GnRH, LH, and FSH. Very important. Menopause. Ovaries become less sensitive, so ovaries cannot feel the messages from FSH and LH, right? FSH and LH are saying, hey, produce estrogen, progesterone, right? Ovary is not responding at all. So these hormones level drop and menstruation stops. That's the whole point. Yep, that's it.